Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. I am Mohan Ramaswamy from Arunachala Ashrama. Welcome to our global satsang. We are so blessed today to celebrate the 72nd Aradhana of Bhagavan Shri Ramana Maharshi. And we are equally happy that the various satsang groups from 4 continents, from Sri Ramanashramam, India, to Europe, which will consist of United Kingdom and France, Australia, and then finally to North America. We have got so many satsang groups which are participating. We will be hearing about different compositions about Bhagavan and also the different aspects of Bhagavan's life. With this, I will hand it over to Michael James from the London Satsang Group. Michael, please go ahead.
Namaskaram. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Today, what I want to talk about is something that Bhagavan often used to say. Bhakti is the mother of Nyana. This is an extremely deep and significant teaching of Bhagavan. Bhakti means love, and love is the key to Bhagavan's path. Love is the key that allows us to open our heart to Bhagavan. So Bhagavan's path is the ultimate path of bhakti. That is, as Bhagavan explained in Upadesha Undiyar, the true path of bhakti really begins when we are not asking God for anything, when we are worshipping him, when we are meditating on him or thinking of him just for the love of him, not for anything we can gain from him. This Bhagavan really begins this in Upadesha Undiyar. He begins to describe this in verse 3. That is, in verse 2, he had explained that the fruit of action passes away, but the seeds, namely the vasanas, are what cast us into a great ocean of action. Therefore, action does not give liberation. But then in verse 4, he says, I'm paraphrasing now, however, action that is done without desire, that is action, nishkarmiya karma, action which is not done for the sake of any fruit, of gaining anything, but for kartanukakum, offered to God, or kartanukakum means done for God. In Sanskrit, it's ishvara pritam, offered to God. When he says done for God, he means done for the love of God. And in the Malayalam version of Upadesha Saram, he says ishvara pritiyanai. That means for the love of God. So when true bhakti begins, when we are not seeking anything from God, we are doing it just for the love of God. We are not wanting to gain anything from God. We are wanting to give ourselves to God. That is when the true path of bhakti begins. And bhakti begins with it begins with action, and that's why Bhagavan talks about nishkarmiya karma. There are 3 kinds of actions we can do. That is, we have 3 instruments of action: body, speech, and mind. So in the next verse, he talks about the 3 types of actions that we can do with these 3 instruments. He says, this is certain. Puja, japa, and dhyana are respectively actions done by body, speech, and mind. And in this order, each one is superior to each other one. Oh, sorry, I forgot one thing. What he says in verse 3, when he talks about nishkarmiya karma, he says, nishkarmiya karma done for the love of God will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. Gati bari karmikam. So what he implies by that is, by worshipping God, by mind, speech, or body, without desire for anything, but just for the love of God, that will purify the mind. And the purified mind will have the clarity to see, to recognize what is the correct path to liberation. So this nishkarmiya karma, doing this puja, japa, and dhyana, this is not itself the direct path to liberation, but it purifies the mind and gives the mind the clarity to understand what is the correct path to liberation, namely the path that Bhagavan has taught us, the path of self-investigation and self-surrender. So in the next, as I say, in the next verse, he talks about he says, this is certain, puja, japa, and dhyana are actions of body, speech, and mind, respectively. And in this order, each is superior to the other one. What he means by superior is it's more efficacious in purifying the mind. Because the actions we do by the body are relatively gross. The actions we do by speech are more subtle. The actions we do by mind are more subtle. More subtle is more powerful. So if we are doing puja, we may be doing the puja mechanically with our body, but our mind may be wandering. Whereas in dhyana, if our mind is wandering, we very quickly detect it. So dhyana is a more effective way of purifying the mind. And then he goes in the next verses, he describes what is puja, that is worshipping anything with the idea that it is God, is good worship of God, he says in the 5th verse. In the 6th verse, he talks about japa. He said, better than hymns, singing hymns of praise is japa. Better than japa done aloud is japa done softly within the mouth. Better than japa done softly within the mouth is mental japa. That is a kind of dhyana. What he means by better in this context, more efficacious in purifying the mind. And then in the 7th verse, he talks about dhyana, and he says, rather than interrupted dhyana, the uninterrupted dhyana, like the flow of a river or of a flow of ghee, of a falling of ghee, in other words, a smooth, unbroken flow is better. Why is it better? Because when we are meditating on God, if our meditation is driven by love, our mind won't wander here and there. If our mind begins to wander and we begin to think of this or that, what problem we've got, what bills we've got to pay, what we have to do in the office tomorrow, that means we are more interested in those things than in thinking about God. So our meditation being uninterrupted is a measure of the extent of the love that we have, and love is the absolute key in this path, in Bhagavan's path. But then the most important verse in this series is the 8th verse. What he says in the 8th verse is, rather than Anya Bhava, Ananya Bhava is best among all. Anya Bhava means what is other. So Anya Bhava in this context refers to meditating on God as something other than ourselves. That is, so long as we are doing any action by mind, by body, puja, or by speech, japa, or by mind, dhyana, so long as we are taking God to be something other than ourselves, our worship of him or meditation on him is a movement of our attention away from ourselves towards something else. We take God to be something other than ourselves. But better than that is Ananya Bhava. And he describes Ananya Bhava as Abanaham Ahum Ananya Bhava. That means, Ananya means what is not other. So Ananya Bhava in this context means meditating on what is not other. That implies what is not other than ourselves. With the understanding that he is I. That's what he means. Abanaham Ahum means in which he is I. That means with the understanding that God is that which is shining in our heart as I, meditating on him, not as something other than ourselves, but as I alone. That is natimum utum, that is the best among all. When he says best among all, in this context, he means this is the most effective means to purify the mind. So long as we are doing puja or japa or dhyana, taking God to be something other than ourselves, these are all actions. But meditating on I alone, meditating on nothing other than I, is not an action, because our attention is not moving away from ourselves towards something else. It is a resting of our attention, a subsidence of the mind in its source. So meditation, by meditating on I alone, we go beyond action, as he indicates in the next verse, verse 9. What he says in verse 9 is, by the strength of that bhava, he doesn't specify which bhava, but by the implication there is by the strength of that ananya bhava. In other words, by the strength of meditation on ourselves, or by the strength of self-attentiveness, bhavana tita sabhava tirutale, just being in our true being, or in a state of being, which transcends bhavana. Bhavana in this context means mental activity. So that state of just being as we actually are, which transcends all mental activity. How do we remain in that state of just being? Only by the strength of self-attentiveness, because self-attentiveness is not an action, it's a state of being. So to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we are thereby just being as we actually are. And that, he says, is parabhakti tattva. That is the nature of the principle of a truth of supreme devotion. So Bhagavan's path is the path of supreme devotion. Better than meditating on God. It is good, of course, to meditate on God as something other than ourselves. But better than that is, best of all, is to meditate on God as I, because he is that which is always shining in our heart as I. So Bhagavan's path is the pinnacle of the path of bhakti. This is the bhakti in its purest form. And why is this bhakti in its purest form? I mean, we can explain this in so many ways in the light of Bhagavan's teachings. One example, for example, in verse 26 of Uludunapadu, he says, Ahande undayin anatum undahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahande indrail indru anatum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Everything in this context means all objects, all phenomena, everything other than ourselves. Ahandeye yabamam. Ego itself is everything. That is, when we are dreaming, we see a whole world full of so many people and so many events are happening and everything. But what we are actually seeing, we are just seeing ourselves as that dream. That is, the dreaming mind is not seeing any external world. It's only seeing itself as that dream world. So everything that ego is aware of, all objects, all phenomena, they all resolve back into ego. They have no existence independent of ego, because they are objects, things perceived by us. Whatever is perceived doesn't exist independent of the one who perceives it. So the objects, all the phenomena, they borrow their semi-existence from the semi-existence of ourself as ego. But ego borrows its existence from the real existence of ourself as Sat-Chit. So the ego, though ego is a thought, Bhagavan often described ego as the first thought, the thought called I. It is a thought unlike all other thoughts, because all other thoughts are objects, so they're jada. Whereas ego is chit jada granti. It is the knot formed by the entanglement of chit and jada. So in ego, there's the jada element, the form that it takes as itself. I am this body is jada. But the I that is in that in that adjunct conflated awareness, I am this body, I am is the chit, is the pure awareness. So ego And so ego is what is called chittabhasa. It is a semblance of awareness. It's a reflection of awareness. But pure awareness is just I am bereft of adjuncts. That is the pure awareness. When that is seemingly mixed and conflated with adjuncts, that becomes ego. So ego has an element of awareness, an element of reality, and an element of unreality. So as a mixed awareness, it is just a thought, but unlike all other thought, ego is the only thought that is endowed with awareness. So all other things borrow their semi-existence from the semi-existence of ego, and ego borrows its semi-existence from Sat-Chit, from the pure awareness I am. Yes, that's why Bhagavan says ego itself is everything. Ego is seeing itself as everything. But the main thing I wanted to point out about this verse 26 is he then says, Adalal yadu idu enju nadale overdal yabam ena or. Therefore, investigating what this is giving up everything. The verb he uses there for giving up, we can translate it as giving up. The verb is actually overdal. Overdal means removing, separating, ceasing, terminating. So by investigating ourselves, we are bringing about the removal of a separation, of a cessation of everything other than ourselves. So we cannot investigate ourselves and know what we actually are without thereby giving up everything else. Because when we know what we actually are, ego is thereby eradicated. Without ego, nothing else exists, because as he says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahande indrel indruanatum. He says the same in Arunachashtakam, for example, in verse 7. Indraham enum enum nenevu enil. If this thought called I, namely ego, doesn't exist, pira ondrum indru. So nothing else exists. So that everything else, everything other than ourselves, depends on the semi-existence of ego. To follow Bhagavan's path, or the aim of Bhagavan's path, is Ahate Arupaya Arunachala. That's what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. Arunachala mena, ahame nene pava, ahate arupaya Arunachala. He's there in the very first verse of Aksharam, right? He says what it's all about. It's about destruction of ego. By meditating on Arunachala, recognizing that Arunachala is that which is shining in our heart as aham, as I, that will eradicate ego. So Arunachala is there just to eradicate ego. Deva mendrunne saravayenne chera boritai Arunachala. When I approached you as my God, you annihilated me completely. Kodi tadayari kolune kati kondeng baba Arunachala. Arunachala, how can I survive after embracing you, who have hoisted your flag to announce yourself as the killer of your devotees? So if we are to follow Bhagavan's path, we must be ready to give up everything, to surrender ourselves. And surrendering ourselves, that means surrendering ego, means surrendering everything else. Only when we give ourselves entirely to him, can we know him as he actually is. This is also beautifully expressed by Bhagavan in the 5th verse of Arunachala Pancharatnam. What he says in the 5th verse of Arunachala Pancharatnam is Unnidattil oppuvitta ullatal epordum unne kandu elamum unnuruvai anniyamil ambuseyum annon Arunachala belhum imburuvam unnilande. That means by or with the mind which is surrendered to you. So it oppuvitta means given to you. That is, in this path, we are not going to gain anything. We are to give everything to him. Then only we gain what is, well, we don't gain anything. What he alone remains in the end. That is the greatest gain of all. What always exists remains as it always is. That is, with the mind surrendered to you, or by the mind that is surrendered to you, Apurvidom unne kandu, always seeing you by the mind that is surrendered to you. That is, in order to see him, in order to see Bhagavan or Arunachala as he really is, we need to surrender our mind entirely to him. And when we surrender our mind entirely to him, we thereby see him always. And by seeing him always, elamum unnuruvai anyamil ambuseyo, unknown. But the one who is always seeing you with a mind that is surrendered to you, will ambuseyum, anyamil ambuseyum, loving without otherness, elamum unuruvai, loving everything as your form without otherness. That is, when we surrender our mind to him, what remains is he alone. So what we are seeing after the surrender of the mind is only him. So, since nothing can be other than him, since he alone is what actually exists, what actually exists is only Atmaswarupa. Arunachala is Atmaswarupa. So that's what that's in the 7th paragraph of Nyana, Bhagavan says, what actually exists is only Atmaswarupa. And it is Atmaswarupa that appears outwardly in the form of Arunachala. So it is to that Atmaswarupa that Bhagavan is addressing these verses of Arunachala Stuti Panchakam. So, the one whose mind is surrendered to you and is thereby seeing you always, thereby sees everything as your form, and he loves it without otherness, anya milambu, that is otherless love. Velhum, achieves victory. How do we achieve victory? Imburuvam unnil, in you the form of happiness, of bliss, ande, sinking or merging or drowning in you the form of happiness, we attain victory. So here Bhagavan is describing his path so beautifully here. That is, we can, but his path is always all about surrender, giving up this mind. And how do we give up the mind? Only by investigating what it is. By investigating what we actually are, we thereby surrender ourselves to him. Thereby we see him podam, always, constantly. When we see him, since he is the one real substance, the vastu or porul, that appears as all this, we are thereby seeing everything as his form. His form means his swarupa, his own form, which is pure awareness. His form is, his swarupa is Atma Swarupa, our own real nature. So seeing everything as our own real nature, and thereby loving everything not as something other than ourselves, but as ourself alone. That's a significance of that word, anya milambu. That's such a beautiful term. Love without otherness. That is pure love, as Bhagavan made clear. In the Sanskrit version, he says, ananya pritya, by that ananya love. So this is Bhagavan's path. It is all about turning the mind within, thereby offering the mind to him, surrendering the mind to him. And it's only by giving ourselves wholly to him, but we can know him as he actually is. That's what he means by epodum unne kandu, seeing you always. We see him always only when we recognize that he is that which is always shining as I. Because the one thing that we are constantly aware of, one thing we never cease to be aware of, is I am, our own existence. But though we are always aware of that, because of our interest in other things, we're allowing our mind to go outward. So we're overlooking the fact that he is ever shining in our heart as I. So in order to see him always, to recognize that he is that which is always shining in our heart as I, we need to surrender our mind completely to him. Unnidatil opuvita ullatar, by the mind that is completely surrendered to him. Then only we can see him always, and then only do we see everything as his form. When we see everything as his form, which means as our own form, as our own real nature, we therefore love everything without any otherness. And that is how we merge in him and achieve victory. Our victory is the complete loss of ourselves. I think in Maharshi's Gospel or somewhere, it is recorded, Bhagavan said, your glory lies where you cease to exist. So it's only when this ego, when this mind is completely surrendered, completely lost in him, that we achieve victory. And it's when we are being swallowed by him, that is truly seeing him. Because as he says in verse 21 of Uladunapadu, Unadal Khan. Unadal Khan is a very, very beautiful, beautiful way Bhagavan has expressed it. Unadal means becoming food. Khan, seeing. So how do we see God? How do we see Bhagavan? How do we see Aranachala? How do we see ourselves? Only by becoming food, by being, only when we are swallowed by him, do we truly see him. Because then being swallowed by him means ego is being stripped of its adjuncts, of its upadis. Nibbanamai chedaral, we're stripped naked. That means we're stripped of all our adjuncts. And then what remains, that naked I am, that is Aranachala, that is Bhagavan. So we can see him only by being completely swallowed by him, having all our adjuncts completely stripped off us. And then what we actually are, that is Bhagavan. That our real nature, Atmaswarupa, that is what Bhagavan actually is. But in order to do this, we must be ready to give up everything. As he says in verse 26, investigating what we actually are is giving up everything, or is bringing about the cessation or the removal or the termination, the ending of everything. So we must be, in order to follow this path, to succeed in this path, we need all-consuming love. We need to have such great love for Bhagavan, but we are ready to give up everything for him. Not only everything else, give up ourselves entirely. We need to become food to him. We need to become Bali, as he says beautifully in verse 10 of Arunachal Patikam. That is what he says in verse 10 of Arunachal Patikam. That's also very, very a very nice thing. I'll take that verse because that shows this verse 10 beautifully illustrates the oneness of Bhakti and Nyana. That is, he says, Patanam Pudumai. I've seen something new, something wonderful. We're Vali Kanta Paravatam, this magnetic hill, but forcibly attracts the soul. Orutaram idane otidum weerin. Sheshteye oduki. That means subduing the mischievous activity. That means the outward-going mental activity of the soul who thinks of it once. And how do we think of him? It is only he who makes us think of him, because he is that magnetic hill, but draws us to him. So we cannot think of him except by his grace. So that magnetic hill forcibly draws us to it, makes us think of him. By making us think of him, he thereby subdues the sheshte. Sheshte means the mischievous activity. That implies the outward-going activity of the mind. And then he says, Oru tanadu abhimukhamaha irtu, pulling it or dragging it or attracting it, that soul, Tanadu abhimukham, to face towards itself. Ade tanbol achalama chedu, thereby making it motionless like itself. That is, as he said implied in verses 8 and 9 of Upadesha, by thinking of nothing other than I, by thinking of him as I, that's what he means here by pulling it to face itself, for one, but he is the one. Well, the one means the one that actually exists. That is the one eye that actually shines in everything. The one eye that is alone, as he says. Yatatamai ulladu Atmaswarupa Mondre. But one thing that actually exists is only Atmaswarupa. So that's what he means when he says Oru there. Himself the one. That means the one Atmaswarupa. So by making us think of him, he thereby subdues the outward-going activity of mind, draws it into face himself, and thereby makes it motionless like himself, as he says in Upadeshundya. That is by the strength of that Ananya Bhava, the mind remains in Sat Bhava, which transcends all bhavana, all mental activity. In other words, it remains in the state of being, and that is supreme devotion. Here he describes that as making it motionless, making the mind motionless like itself. And then he says, Ab innuir bali kollam. He accepts that sweet soul. Sweet means it's matured, it's ripened with love. But where did it get that love from? That love comes only from Aranachi. He alone can sow the seed of love in our heart. So he sows the seed of love in our heart, thereby draws our mind inwards, thereby he matures us, makes us fully pakva, fully ripened fruit. And then with that sweet fruit of the fully ripened soul, he takes us bali. Bali means food that is offered in sacrifice. So we must be willing to offer ourselves as bali, as a sacrifice to him. Then only he will swallow us. And when he swallows us, then then alone we are truly seeing him. Unadal Khan's being becoming food is seeing. And then he ends this verse by saying, Ichten, that means, what is this? That's an exclamation of wonder. What a wonder this is. And then he gives us very, 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 very good advice in the last line. O to min, we go. O souls, be saved thinking of this great hill. Ulum adanil ole ivue koli aranama giriye. Be saved thinking of this great Aranagiri, this great Arana hill, the killer of the soul who shines in the heart. Who shines in the heart means he's always shining in the heart as I. So unless we are willing to give ourselves entirely to him, we cannot even begin to follow this path. So the key to this path is bhakti. Bhakti is the beginning, the middle, and the end. Or as Bhagavan often used to say, grace is the beginning, and the middle, and the end. His grace, of course, is always available, but his grace works in us to the extent to which we offer ourselves to him. But even our offering ourselves to him, even that is only by his grace. That's why Bhagavan said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. That reminds me of something I wanted to say at the beginning, but it's okay. It's the order in which things are said doesn't matter. In the final verse of Anma Vidde, the song in which Bhagavan is emphasizing, but this is this path of self-investigation is the easiest path of all. That's the main theme of Anma Vidde, this song. And in the final verse, he says, it's quite a long verse and a long sentence, but I'll break it up into. He first describes Arunachala as Binadia Vilangum, Kanadia Poricum, Kan Manakannaku Kannai. That is, Arunachala is that I, that awareness, but is the eye to the mind eye, which is the eye to the five senses, which illumine the all the physical universe, or the not only physical, the physical or mental universe, but consists of the 5 elements, beginning with space. So that's one description of Arunachala. He described it as the eye to the mind eye, Kannaku Kannai, as he sings in Aksharam, right? And then he says, Mana Binnakum Binnai, as the space to the mind space. That is the whole of this physical space, this Buddhakasha, is contained in which space? In the mind space. It's only in the mind that all this appears. So the Buddhakasha is contained in the Manakasha or Chittakasa, the mind space, and the mind space is contained in the Chittakasa, the space of pure awareness. So that's what he's referring to here when he says the space to the mind space, the space that contains the mind space, but in turn contains the whole of this, the whole of the all physical space. He is the one portal, the one substance that shines at these. This is all a description of Arunachala. He says, Olirum Anamale, Anamale who shines as the eye to the mind eye, the space to the, as the eye to the mind eye, which is the eye to the, to all the 5 senses, and there's a space to the mind space. This is all a description of Anamale. But then he says, Beru enadu iranda ulnadu ulatu, in the ulatu, in the heart or the mind, that is inwardly investigating. Irandapadi means as it is. That means being as it is, just being as we actually are. Beru enadu, without thinking of anything else, anything other than ourselves. In other words, in the keenly self-attentive mind that is there by being as it is, anamale, my enanma kaname. Anamale enanma is another beautiful term Bhagavan uses here because it has a different double meaning. We can, anma, the basic meaning of anma is oneself. So in this context, it refers to our real nature. So anamale enanma, we can take as our real nature, which is called anamale. But it also has another meaning. En can also mean my. So Bhagavan is saying myself anamale. So he's referring to anamale as his own self. So we can take it either way. Both amount to the same thing, will be seen. But then the main thing I wanted to say about this very beautiful verse, how he ends it. This is the ending of this verse and the ending of the whole of this song, this Anma Vidde. He says 3 very, very important sentences. Aralam Vainame, grace is also needed. Ambu Purname, adorn yourself with love. Be adorned with love. Imbutoname, bliss will shine forth. So the key to success in this path, that is, he says Aralam Vainame, that is a huge understatement by saying grace is also necessary, because the truth is everything is done by grace. It's only by his grace that we are drawn to this path. As he said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. So it is grace that draws us to this path. It is grace that that's why he said grace is the beginning, because it draws us to this path. Grace is the middle, because it is grace alone that guides us and supports us and sustains us while we are following this path. And grace is also the end. Why is it the end? Because the final conclusion of this path is we will be swallowed entirely by grace. So grace is everything. But here he, in his, as he often did, he will, he expresses things as in the form of an understatement, but the implication is, of course, far greater than the surface meaning of the words. It's not just that grace is also needed. Grace does everything, as he makes clear in so many places. And then he says, Ambu Purname. Purname means adorn yourself. Like if you're putting on very fine clothing, if you dress up for some special function, that is Purnima. You're putting on all your finest clothing. So he says, adorn yourself with love. But, well, he doesn't say, he said, be adorned with love is the closest we can come to expressing it in English. But even that love, where does the love come from? Can any of us have love for him if he doesn't give us that love? That is the very nature of Bhagavan. He is infinite love, because as Bhagavan revealed in the first paragraph of Nyana, love is our real nature. We all have greatest love for ourselves. Bhagavan, who doesn't see anything other than himself, loves everything as himself. So Bhagavan's love for us is infinite. It is his love that is what we otherwise call grace. It is, and since he is the very embodiment of love, Amburu Varunachala, the very form of love, or as he described beautifully in verse 101 of Aksharamlai, he's the ocean of love. In verse 101 of Aksharamlai, he says, Ambuvilalipo, like ice in water, Amburu Vunil, in you the form of love, melt me as love, in you the form of love. So the implication there is Arunachal is the vast ocean of love. Bhagavan is the vast ocean of love. We are like a small hailstone that has fallen in this ocean. Of course, we fallen in the ocean isn't even quite correct, because we come from nowhere but that ocean. But we are like a small little piece of ice in this ocean. We are nothing other than him. The ice is nothing other than the sea. It's the same substance, water, but it's solidified. So we must melt in him. So he asked, like ice melting in water, melt me as love in you, the form of love. So Arunachal is the vast ocean of love. So whatever little love we have for him can come only from him, because he is the infinite ocean of love. There's no love other than Arunachala. So whatever love we have, whatever little liking we have to surrender ourselves or to turn our attention within, is given only by him. So he says we should adorn ourselves with love. That is, we should open our heart. We should allow him to know. He has sown the seed of love in our heart. By our surrendering to him, we must open our heart and allow him to nurture this seed of love that he's sown in our heart, because it's only by that love that we can give ourselves to him. Because if we consider it, what is the nature of ego? The nature of ego is always, as he says in verse 25 of Uludunaptu, Urupatri Undam, Urupatri Nikkam. Urupatri Undam means grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri Nikkam, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri Undu Mika Ongam, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu Urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. That means the very nature of ego is always to be grasping form. But ego itself, as he says in the last line of that verse, is Uruvatra Payahande. It's a formless phantom or demon ego. So it is formless, because it has no form of its own. We cannot rise as ego without grasping the form of a body as I. So, but ego, though it always comes into existence, stands and flourishes, grasping a form as itself, it is not that form. It is itself a formless phantom. And phantom, the word pay means both a phantom in that it's something bodiless, but it also implies evil. It's a demon, it's an evil spirit. It's a phantom because it has no substance of its own. It's got no form of its own, so it depends upon the form of a body. It's got no substance of its own, so it borrows its substance, its existence and its awareness from Sat-Chit, from I am. So ego is neither this nor that. It's neither Chit nor Jada. It is the Chit Jada Granti. It is the knot that is formed when these two things seemingly become entangled. So the very nature of ego is always to grasp things other than itself. I've missed out one sentence in that verse 25 of Aradhana, most important sentence of all. Tedinal otum pidicum. If sought, it takes flight. That is, the nature of ego is always to grasp things other than itself. But if instead of grasping other things, it tries to grasp itself, it will subside and dissolve back into its source. That's what he means by it will take flight, it will run away. That is, nobody has ever seen ego. We seem to be ego only so long as we're looking away from ourselves. If we look back at ourselves to see who am I, there's no such thing as ego to be found. If the snake seems to be a snake only so long as we don't look at it carefully enough. If we look at it carefully enough, we'll say, oh, it's just a rope. Likewise, if we look at ego carefully enough, we'll see it is not ego, it is just pure awareness. It is just pure Sat-Chit. So it's only because of our failure to look at ourselves, but we seem to be ego. So ego has no existence at all. But the very nature of ego, because it cannot exist without grasping other things, ego will always be wanting to grasp other things. So since the very nature of ego is to grasp other things, why will ego be willing to let go of everything else and surrender itself? That is possible not by ego itself. It has to be a power greater than ego that can enable ego to surrender itself. That power is the power of love, the power of Bhakti. That is why Bhagavan said, Bhakti is the mother of Nyana. Without all-consuming love, we cannot succeed in this path. We wouldn't even begin, we wouldn't even take interest in this path. The very fact that we have even the slightest interest in this path, the very fact that we're attracted to Bhagavan shows he has already sown the seed of love in our heart. But we have to play our part. As he says in the 12th paragraph of Nyana, God and Guru are in truth not different. Just like the prey that has fallen into the jaws of the tiger cannot turn back, cannot escape, so those who have been caught in the glance of the Guru's grace will never be forsaken, but will surely be saved by him. That is, he says beautifully, Abvare, likewise, like that, the prey in the jaws of a tiger, Guruvin Arul Parvayal, Patabagal, those who have been caught in the glance of Guru's grace, Avaral, by him, Rakshika Padavare Andri, they will certainly be saved. Andri means, except that they will certainly be saved. Oru Kalum Kaivida Pada, he will never abandon them, he will never let go. So he will never abandon us, he will surely save us. However, he adds one important proviso or caveat at the end. Eininum Guru Kartia Varipadi Tabaradu Nadakabendum. That is, he will save us, but we have to play our little part. We have to cooperate with him. How do we cooperate with him? By surrendering ourselves to him. And how do we surrender ourselves to him? By, as he explains in the next, very next sentence, the first sentence of the 13th paragraph, by clinging to Atmachintana so firmly that we thereby don't give room to rising of any other thought. We are thereby remaining as Atmanishtaparan, and that is giving ourselves to God. So in order to cooperate with him, we need to surrender ourselves to him. And in order to surrender ourselves to him, we need to cling so firmly to Atmachintana, that means to self-attentiveness, but we give no room to the rising of any other thought. As he says in this 5th verse of Anmavide, Vero enada, not thinking of any other thing, Irundapadi, being as we are. That is what he's talking about here. So it's only by clinging to self-attentiveness so firmly, but we thereby don't give room, even the slightest room, to the rising of any other thought, but we can truly give ourselves to him. So long as we're interested in anything, any thoughts, anything other than him, we are not giving ourselves to him. We are still retaining ourselves. We're not handing over charge of ourselves to him. So he's ready to do everything for us, but he will never force us. We must be willingly. He will swallow us, but only when we are willing to be swallowed by him. So we must be willing to give ourselves wholly to him. So it's only when we have all-consuming love, but we can succeed in this path. And that love cannot come from ego. It can come only from the source of ego, from the reality of ego. That is Bhagavan. It can come only from deep within our own heart. Because he is that which is ever shining in our heart as I. He is the infinite ocean of love. So by shining in our heart as I, he's slowly been cleansing, purifying our mind. And now he's sown that seed of love in our heart. We have to play our little part by trying our best to turn within and surrender ourselves to him. He will do everything else. He takes care of absolutely everything. All our material needs, spiritual needs, everything is taken care of by him. But we must be willing to surrender ourselves to him. That's why he goes on to say in that 13th paragraph of Nyana, after saying, but I'll just read the sentence in Tamil because it's so beautifully expressed in Tamil. Anma chintane tavira. That means except Atma Chintana, Vera Chintane Kalambavatiku Satram Idam Kodamal, not giving even the slightest room to arising any other thought except Atma Chintana. Atmanishta Parana Iripade, being as Atmanishta Paran, that means being as one who is firmly established as oneself, Tanne Isanaku Aripadam, that is giving oneself to God. And then he says in the next sentence, so what he implies in this sentence, he's implying, but even the burden of thinking, we should surrender to him. We should let him do all our thinking for us. We need not think of anything. All we need to do is to think of him shining in our heart as I. Leave all other thoughts for him to take care of. So in the next sentence, he says, Isam peril, evelo barate patalum, abalabayum, abavahitu kol kera. So how that means however much burden we place on God, he will bear all of that. So we can place any amount of burden on him. So even the burden of thinking we can place on him, he will bear it all. And then he says, Sakala Karan Galayum or Parameshwara Shakti Nadadu Kondiru Kirapadiyal. Since one Parameshwara Shakti, one supreme ruling power, one supreme divine power is driving all karyas. That means everything that ought to happen, everything that should happen, he's making everything happen as it's meant to happen. So when such is the case, Namum Adaku Adangi Rama, instead of we also yielding ourselves to it, Ipadi Vendum, Apadi Vendu, Endru Sada Chintipadain. Why should we be constantly thinking it's necessary to do like this, it's necessary to do like that? And then he gives this very well-known and beautiful analogy. When the train is carrying all the burdens, why should we, when we know the train is carrying all the burden, why should we who are traveling in that train suffer carrying our little luggage on our head instead of placing it aside and traveling in comfort? So why should we suffer unnecessarily? Bhagavan's path is not only the path of love, it's also the path of happiness, because to the extent to which we surrender ourselves to him, we are thereby free and carefree. So the more we surrender ourselves to him, the more pleasant our life will be. That doesn't mean that everything will always go favorably. He will throw all sorts of difficulties at us. That's all part of the process of cleansing us. But we will be the more we are surrendered to him, the less we will be affected by whatever troubles may be thrown at us in life. And whatever troubles are given to us, it's given only by him, because our whole life our prarabdha is ordained entirely by him. So whatever seemingly favorable or seemingly unfavorable things we are given to experience, it's all given to us by him for our own good. So all Bhagavan asks us to do is to surrender ourselves completely to him. And he gives us a clue how to surrender ourselves by clinging to self-attentiveness. But clinging to self-attentiveness means giving up everything. So for that, we require all-consuming love. That love can be given only by him. That's why in the verse, Ariyati Tarajivara Dahavari Jugohil, Arivai Rami Paramatam and Arunachala Ramana. Arunachala Ramana is the supreme, is the Paramatma, but is shining as awareness, but is blissfully existing as awareness in the cave of the heart lotus of all jivas, beginning with Hari. So from the highest God to the smallest ant, he is shining in the heart of every one of us as that fundamental awareness I am. So how can we know him as such? Parival ulam uruha, with the heart melting with love. So love is absolutely essential. Only when our heart melts with love, is ready to melt with love for him, will we be able to go deep within, enter the cave where he is dwelling, and thereby Arivamviri, the Arivamviri Tirava, the eye of awareness will be opened. Nijam Arivai, you will know your real nature. You will know what you actually are. Nijam means our real nature. Adu Veliam, it will reveal itself. But the key to this is love. That is why Bhagavan said, Bhakti is the mother of Nyana. So we cannot begin to understand Bhagavan's path until we understand the all importance of the paramount importance of love. Love is the key to success in this path, because this path is about giving ourselves wholly to him. And we'll be willing to give ourselves to him only to the extent to which we have all-consuming love for him. Therefore, Bhakti alone is the mother of Jnana. Without Bhakti, we cannot succeed in this path, and that Bhakti can be given only by him. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.